It's great to see such a good crowd here today. Yesterday, I went to pick up my grandmother from the airport. It was the air show in Chicago. We're talking about the Beatitudes. Today, we're talking about those who mourn. But I didn't have to mourn. Because blessed are those who ride the bus, for they will not have to rage at traffic all day. I hope that you are having a good morning. I know that I am. We had some rough spots here and there, but overall, I'm doing a whole lot better than last week. Yay!
Grandmother's here, that's why.
There you go. Last week we talked about the poor in spirit. We talked about recognizing our spiritual poverty. We talked about recognizing how we have nothing in and of ourselves to offer, but that's okay because Christ offers it all. This week we build on that. We follow on that with those who mourn. We follow on that with Jesus saying, Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Now, usually, when we think of mourning, we think about mourning the loss of a person in our lives, or a job, or something going really wrong, and we mourn that. But in this context, I don't believe that's what Jesus is speaking of. Now, please don't get me wrong. We serve a God who is the source of all comfort, of all relief, of all that we need to get past difficult situations, but in this particular context, Jesus is speaking of a spiritual mourning caused by sin and its effect on our lives. And it's a blessing because comfort is coming, because comfort waits for us in God. But we have to be ready for it. And the only way to get that comfort is to mourn it in the first place. Something that we do not do often, or at least in my experience, we don't do often, is truly mourn our sin. Is truly mourn the effect that sin has had. Mourn the fact that we have failed Almighty God. And mourning isn't saying, oh, well, gee willigers, I messed up. I need to try and do better next time. Mourning is a sense of sorrow that we have betrayed the Master. Mourning is an uncontrollable urge to let our remorse out, let it show in one way or another. And there's a right and a wrong way to do this. There's a good way to mourn, and there's a not good way to mourn. And so today what I want to do is look at two different ways of mourning. One really, really bad, one really, really good. And I want to do this by looking at two men who betrayed Christ. Two men who betrayed Jesus despite having seen everything, heard everything, being with him. They still betrayed him. And so today we'll be in Matthew chapter 26 and 27. And we'll be talking about, if you haven't figured it out yet, Judas and Peter. Now, chances are you likely know what these two men did. Judas sold Christ out to those who were out to get him. Peter denied ever having known the man and got worse at doing it each time. Matthew sets the scene for Judas in chapter 26 in verse 14, where he writes, "Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, 'What are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you?' And they counted out to him 30 pieces of silver. So from that time he sought opportunity to betray him." See, Judas planned out this betrayal. It wasn't a mistake. He didn't get caught in the middle of something. He planned it out and he sought it out. Growing up, I had a lot of difficulty understanding why Judas would do this. What was the point? I mean, we know that he was greedy. We know he was selfish, that he stole from their own treasury. But why would he sell Jesus out? Well, I believe that what happened was not what he was expecting to happen. See, Jewish theology at this time was that the Messiah was going to come. They were going to overthrow whatever government was oppressing them. They were going to raise up Israel to rule all other nations. The Messiah was going to come and establish a physical kingdom on earth that Israel would be at the top of. Now, in studying, I lean towards thinking that that's what Judas was trying to force Jesus into. Force him into a conflict where he would have to pull out all the stops. And I also think that it got out of control. It didn't go where he thought it was going to go. In Matthew 26 and verse 47, we see the result of this betrayal. We see what happens here. And starting in verse 47, "And while Jesus was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, with a great multitude with swords and clubs, came from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now his betrayer had given them a sign, saying, 'Whomever I kiss, he is the one. Seize him.' Immediately he went up to Jesus and said, 'Greetings, Rabbi,' and kissed him. But Jesus said to him, 'Friend, why have you come?' Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and took him. And suddenly one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword, struck the servant of the high priest, and cut off his ear. But Jesus said to him, 'Put your sword in its place. For all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Or do you not think that even now I can pray to my Father in heaven, and he will provide me with more than 12 legions of angels?' How then could the scriptures be fulfilled that it must happen thus?" In that hour Jesus said to the multitudes, "Have you come out against a robber with swords and clubs to take me? I sat daily with you, teaching in the temple, and you did not seize me. But all this was done, that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples forsook him and fled. This did not go as planned, I think, from Judas's perspective. People with swords and clubs, Jesus has the power. Remember, this is the same Judas who has been following Jesus, living with him daily for the last 3 years. He's seen him feed the 5,000. He's seen him raise the dead. He's seen him do feats that no other person could do. And yet he betrays him. And when Jesus accepts the betrayal, all his disciples forsake him and flee, run away. And Judas realizes that he has really, really messed up. And he mourns his sin. He's upset. He realizes that he has just betrayed his master. And so in verse 27, chapter 27, starting in verse 3, then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he had been condemned, was remorseful and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. And I said, what is that to us? You see to it. Judas took the right path here. He mourned his sin. He confessed his sin. He went and tried to make it right. But when it didn't go his way, he chose to give up. In verse 5, he says, and he threw down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. He gave up. This is a man who has heard Jesus speak about the forgiveness and the love and the help that the Son of Man, that the Son of God came to bring. He's been hearing this message for 3 years. But when he gets to this point, he doesn't think about that. He doesn't hold on to that. And he gives up. I don't think that there's a person here who would say that the blood of Christ on the cross could not have forgiven Judas. I don't think there's a single person here who would argue that. But he didn't look to Christ. He didn't look to forgiveness. He looked at what he had done and he gave up. And he suffered death when instead he could have had life. We can't give up on Christ. We can't give up on what he offers. We can't give up on the power that he has. On the other side of the coin, we have Peter, who also betrayed his master and betrayed him in one of the worst ways possible. If we go back into Matthew 26, after Jesus has been arrested and he's being put on this secret trial at night, we read in verse 69, now Peter sat outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him saying, you also were with Jesus of Galilee. But he denied it before them all, saying, I don't know what you're saying. Peter's caught off guard. I'm convinced that he's kind of caught off guard here. Hey, wait. You were with him, right? No. Wasn't me. And he fails the test. This is Peter who had heard Jesus say, those who deny me, I will deny him before the Father. I mean, Peter has a direct correlation here. Christ says, if you deny me, I will deny you. And Peter's just denied him. And so he fails it once, but then it happens again. In verse 71, we read, "And when he had gone out to the gateway, another girl saw him and said to those who were there, 'This fellow also was with Jesus of Nazareth.' But again he denied with an oath, 'I do not know the man.'" So the first time he says, "I don't know what you're saying. That wasn't me." Now he's making an oath about it. So not only is he failing a second time, he's failing worse. You don't make an oath, especially as an Old Testament Jew. You don't make an oath lightly. And yet he has another chance. He has one more chance to kind of, if not make it right, at least hopefully make things better. In verse 73, "And a little later, those who stood by and came up and said to Peter, 'Surely you also are one of them, for your speech betrays you.' Then he began to curse and swear, saying, 'I do not know the man.'" So the first time, I'm thinking, okay, he's caught off guard. He's like, "Oh, it wasn't me. I don't entertain." Second time, he makes an oath. Third time, he is swearing and cursing. You know what the penalty for curses is in the old law? Death. He has totally and utterly failed the test. He has denied the man who he called himself the Son of God. Remember, Peter has one of the earliest confessions of Christ that we have. But when put under the gun, he pulls back, and not just a little. He completely and utterly betrays his master. And so immediately the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the word of Jesus, who had said to him, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. So he went out and wept bitterly. Another account says Jesus turned and looked at him. Looked at him. So 3 times. Worse each time, he denies the man he calls the Son of God. He denies the man he calls Messiah. And when that rooster crows and Jesus looks at him, he realizes what he's done. He goes out and he weeps bitterly. This is not the kind of weeping that it says, "Oh, I really messed up. I need to do better next time." This is uncontrollable, unrelenting mourning for what he has done. But he doesn't allow that to end it all. He sticks around. If we go over to the book of John, chapter 21, Jesus has been raised from the dead. Peter knows this. And Jesus has a conversation with them on the beach. And starting in verse 15 of John 21, we read, "So when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, 'Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these?' He said to him, 'Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.' He said to him, 'Feed my lambs.' He said to him a second time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he had said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Most assuredly, I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself and walked where you wished. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish. This he spoke, signifying by what death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, follow me. Just before this conversation takes place, while they're still all on the boat, it says that they see someone on the land. They're about 100 yards away. And it says that the disciple whom Jesus loved said, it's the Lord. And Peter dives into the water, doesn't wait for the boat, doesn't wait for anything else. He dives into that water to swim to him. He's going to get to Jesus. Because he still is following Jesus. See, this is the difference between a failing faith and a saving faith. A failing faith gives up. Says, I've gone too far, I've done too much, I've been too bad, I can't be good enough, I can't restore this, so I can't do anything about it, I'm giving up. A saving faith says, I have failed, I have messed up, I've done everything I can't fix this, but Jesus can. And as we know, Peter accepts Christ's call. All we have to do is turn over a page to Acts chapter 2. See the sermon that he gives. Speaking about Christ and who he was and what he's done and how it works. In chapter 4 of Acts, we read, then Peter, they're before the Sanhedrin, they've been brought in because they're preaching Jesus and the religious leaders don't want them to. And Peter responds, rulers of the people and elders of Israel, if we this day are judged for a good deed done to a helpless man, by what means he has been made well, let it be known to you all and to all the people of Israel that by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, whom God raised from the dead, by him this man stands here before you whole. This is the stone which was rejected by you builders, which has become the chief cornerstone. Nor is there salvation in any other, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. He's not denying anymore. He didn't give up. He mourned his sin, but he came back to Christ. Because Christ could restore him where he needed to be. That is a saving faith. That is the result of mourning sin the right way. But how do we do that? Well, for one, we need to state our sin clearly. Without excuse, without evasion, without rationalizing it. Just old school confession of exactly what we've actually done. And when we've done that, we need to weigh what that sin has done, what that sin has cost both ourselves and those around us. Because sin rarely, if ever, only affects ourselves. It affects those we love, it affects those closest to us. And we need to be honest about that. Because until we're honest about that, until we're open about that, we're not going to be able to mourn the right way. But above all, we need to look to the cross, where it all comes clean, where it all is taken away, where we are purified before God. And we need to hear, we need to listen to, and we need to follow the call of Christ and take that difficult action to change. Because until we're willing to change, until we're willing to take those steps, our words are just that. Words. And this is the reality of what it means to follow Christ and be saved in His blood. Not to give up from all our failures, but to accept what He's done and follow Him anyway. The path of Judas is a path of death. Giving up on Christ, giving up on it all, leads us nowhere. The path of Peter is a path of life. Coming back to Christ, following Him. Even when we failed so bad and kept making it worse. So I want to encourage you this week. I want to encourage you now. Be real about the sin in your life. And accept the reality that you may have some mourning to do. But don't stop at mourning. Mourn your sin and then move forward in the call that Christ says, in the call that Christ gives. Let us be His people. Because the blood of Christ covers it all, but it only covers for those who come to Him. So there may be some who need that blood to cover them, who need to come and give themselves to Christ, to be buried in His blood. And there may be those who have been, but have been on the verge of giving up. Be willing to mourn, but then be willing to move and to change. Because Christ is strong enough, Christ is powerful enough, Christ is good enough, Christ is enough to take even the most broken, to take even the most downtrodden, to take even the most mournful and renew them and restore them to life. So if we can help you, if you need to go to God in prayer yourself, I want you to do so now. I want you to let someone know while we stand and while we sing.